Yeah. All right, good morning. It's an honor to be invited out here. I live in the middle of the U.S., next to the mountains, Colorado. Spent a lot of time in San Francisco also, which is, I guess, some of the things I'll be talking about. I want to keep this kind of a fun, personal talk because Mirko gave me the topic of for fun and for profit. So don't put this online. Oh, wait, too late. Again, I'm Dave Coleman. I recently, about a year ago, technically 3 years ago, but PickNik Consulting is a thing I put together to kind of support and grow MoveIt. It needed a kind of a sponsoring company, I thought. So kind of created that. And I've been involved in MoveIt since the beginning of its development. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. And so I kind of consider myself like a community leader in that project and a lot of other pieces of ROS as well. And then on the right here, you see I went to Georgia Tech and University of Colorado, and I've also done a lot of research exchanges and internships at these different companies. So it's given me a lot of experience, a lot of different types of companies. It's been an honor. And so what I want to talk about today is how I got involved in all of this. So I'm going a little back to the history of Willow Garage, and I got to see some of that, so it was a fun time and talk about what that was like. I'll have to do a little plug for MoveIt, but I was told not to keep this technical, so I'm not going to talk about like what we've been working on and what's new or exciting theory. That's a different talk for a different day. And then how I kind of stepped up as like the lead maintainer today, and then building a company around it. So that's getting more into the profit side and the challenges that I think a lot of people here know really well of funding open source. ROS-Industrial Consortium is doing great with that. And finally, a little bit about profitability and how that works. So how I got involved was in the beginning of grad school, my advisor said, hey, try this OpenRave thing, but also there's this ROS thing. And I looked at OpenRave and I looked at ROS, and I was like, I'm going to go with ARM navigation. It looked better, had better documentation, cooler pictures. So you see an early picture of the PR2 here before it had skin, kind of naked. And I was really impressed with what the guys at Willow Garage were doing, and so I applied for an internship. Not that special, a lot of people went for internships at Willow Garage, but I interviewed with Sachin Chida and E. Gil Jones and got in, so it was really a great experience to go up to Willow Garage. And in California, when I got there, I ended up working with Johan Sukin, and he's been my mentor ever since. He's now at the Waymo team, Google self-driving car, one of the big planning guys. But at the time, he wrote OMPL, which a lot of us know is like this great motion planning library. And then he wrote a lot of MoveIt, kind of the lead author of that, together with some other people at Willow. And so I really appreciate him, and you see him at a booth here at Willow Garage. But that's just kind of how I jumped in there. And one thing that Willow Garage did really well was making it was fun. So the CEO of Willow Garage at the time, Steve Cousins, he had this crazy thing on your first day as an intern. He took everyone to the conference room, and he told us that he thinks of us interns as viruses, and he wanted to infect us with ROS and have us take it back to our research labs to infect the rest of our lab with ROS. So they had this really big initiative to get ROS out there and adopted in the world. And that's always stuck with me, is like, okay, I'll do that. And so, yeah, sure enough, I went back to Colorado and got the rest of my lab involved. And I think a lot of people who were interns who went through Willow Garage did that around the world. They had interns from all over Europe, and that's something that was really cool about it. But they also got right, like making open source fun. And granted, they had too much money. One of the guys from helping start Google kind of put millions of dollars into this project. But here's the famous picture of them in the zero gravity airline. They're kind of floating around. I wasn't there for that. But a few pictures here maybe haven't been seen before was us teaching the PR2 to serve beer from a keg. That's the bottom middle, maybe never shown before in public. And then at one point, some interns dressed up the PR2 as a hobot, some kind of hobo, I suppose. And that was interesting. I was going through my pictures for this presentation, and I had these recorded. I was surprised. Me dancing with a PR2. So they were really good at like getting excitement up about open source robotics and getting really talented people to come out to California, and they had all the free lunches that the Google type environments have. And I think it created a lot of impact. And so I'll talk about the impact they did. They had this simple idea at Willow that this is from the ROS.org website, but I think it originated from Willow Garage, that this is really hard stuff we're doing. So creating robotic software, we're getting to the point where it's beyond our lifetime to do alone. And so no single individual laboratory or institution can hope to do it on their own. And maybe you've heard this enough already, and this is kind of boring to you, but for me that was really inspiring. I was like, yes, that makes a lot of sense. Like, we need to really bring our resources together and our collective scientific bodies and build on top of that to get these personal robotics out. And so that's kind of been a driving factor for me. And this is true for all sorts of science and inventions. Everything builds on everyone else, and you don't start from scratch. So let's not reinvent the wheel over and over again. And that's kind of the whole thesis of the ROS project. And their vision, besides the paradigm shift normal language, the next part was, by investing in open source and open platform adoption models, we aim to lay the groundwork for the use of personal robotics applications in everyday life. And again, I think they really did this, where even though Willow Garage closed after a few years, the impact that they've left behind them of open source investment has had profound impacts at companies, startups that spun out of this, research groups. And I think we should keep this in mind as we get further and further away from when Willow Garage closed. It's still something that we are kind of continuing on. And so that's one of my personal missions as well, is to continue that on. So what is MoveIt, and why is it so fun? First, it's got an exclamation mark in the name, so it's got to be fun. Like, you can't say MoveIt without saying MoveIt. And then on top of that, King Julian is the lemur from the movie Madagascar, DreamWorks. He's the official mascot of MoveIt because he sings the song, I like to move it, move it. So there's makes MoveIt more fun, I guess. But on top of that, MoveIt's a motion planning library. As most of you guys know, but just in case people here haven't heard much about it, it does kinematics and probabilistic sampling-based motion planning. Has a lot of integration of different components for doing manipulation. It's got some grasping capabilities. It's intended to be combined with other grasping libraries as well. It's got some 3D perception, but it's also intended to be combined with plugins with other perception libraries. And it has integration to various types of controls that actually send it to the robot arm for execution. And it has the base works for mobile navigation. You can do a little bit of it, but that feature set was never fully complete. So still today, people use the navigation stack, move base, those components. But in an ideal world, they'd actually be combined together in one global plan that allows you to move the base and the arms at the same time. But that's future work. And MoveIt has a lot of great user interfaces. So pictured here is RViz, but they have some plugins that allow custom displays. We have all these buttons for experimenting with different types of planners. It's got great setup capabilities with the setup assistant. So there's some of the strengths of MoveIt. There's plenty of weaknesses too. We can talk about that in a different talk. But with every open source project, there's pros and cons. A few stats on the MoveIt project. We counted at least 107 robots. It was a very tedious job to count, but I'm sure there's way more than that. Robots that have been integrated to use MoveIt. We have some stats on download counts, 12K a month. Citations, this is 432, so it's been used a lot for people's theses and masters and PhD, and it's been used to teach education about motion planning, about robotic arms, and so that's a cool component of any open source project, is typically you get some education uses out of it as well. 75,000 users in the past year, and then we have some stats on just general discourse and answers.ros.org, which we also use. And 282 users have actually contributed code to the main repo. I think that's pretty exciting. That's a fairly large number. It's not on the size of what you see in these web apps, in the mobile app development world. They get much higher numbers than that. But in the robotics community, which is fairly smaller, we've got a lot of attention. And we had 10 locations this past year at World Movie Day. I'll talk about that more in a minute. And again, we're robot agnostic, so that's kind of a hard thing to do and do it well. And so there's always trade-offs between you want to support all these different types of kinematic configurations and different types of joints, and then you lose some of the power and capabilities. But it's something MoveIt has, I think, a decent balance of those two constraints. You can always write something in MATLAB for your one robot that works for that one problem, but doing it in a general way with different kinds of URDFs, different numbers of arms, much more difficult. And I wanted to mention that I got involved in MoveIt in grad school partly because I wrote my thesis off of it. So the title of my thesis was Methods for Improving Motion Planning Using Experience. And it was just some things I saw that I thought were wrong with the way OMPL and MoveIt were working, like just having to replan every time. And so I basically added this notion of muscle memory. And the result is that you can reduce query resolution time, improve the quality of paths, and get more predictable motions. So kind of a hybrid approach. This is in an open source repository next to MoveIt, but not merged directly in. So don't be looking for that in the core, because the difference between benchmarking grad school software and more production software, there's a big jump there that I'll talk more about later in the funding portion. But so the transition to lead maintainer, I want to clarify, like, I didn't start the project. I was an intern when the project first started. But there was a period where the MoveIt project was a little bit shaky and not much was happening with it. So I have this timeline about Willow Garage starting in 2007, which is a long time ago. It's a decade ago now, over a decade. And then you see OMPL being created, and MoveIt was started in 2011. It was kind of a new version of the ARM navigation, as I mentioned. And then you had FCL, and they officially announced MoveIt in 2013, and then a few months later, they closed Willow. And so then it was kind of this orphan project, but SRI International and Sachin Chita, his team, took on MoveIt for a few years. And I started getting really involved at that time, and I started getting frustrated about a lack of response time to pull requests, and the overall desire to not break MoveIt, keep it stable, which meant no changes. It was just like, we're done, this is it. And I had issues with that. And so the people behind SRI, they've moved on to start another startup called Kinema Systems. And so there was this period where there wasn't much leadership behind MoveIt. And so I kind of jumped in at that point around 2016. Again, it was becoming kind of stagnant. So anyone who uses MoveIt will tell you there's still so much work to be done. There's infinite research to put into it, improvements, making the paths more smooth, more optimal. And there was some unclear leadership about how to change these things and what path to go. And so I just kind of got involved. A lot of people were like, Dave, please step up and help with this. So I had discussions with some of the ROS-Industrial founders, actually. So Paul and Sean, who've now moved on, but at the time they were really encouraging me to get involved. So I thank ROS-Industrial for that help. And then I worked with the guys at Open Robotics to see what this would be like, and talking to other MoveIt developers. And so the big action plan was, let's start having MoveIt maintainer meetings. And they were happening every few months or so, maybe every 2 or 3 months. And this is something I encourage you to take back to whatever open source project you really care about. Is these meetings, I think, are pretty powerful. And we've seen these working groups at various different components of ROS. And in particular, recently we've seen Navigation 2 and ROS2. They're having monthly meetings. Cartographer is a kind of a SLAM type project from Google, but they have been really engaging the community with monthly meetings, and I've been kind of looking to see how they do theirs out of curiosity. But it's really quite simple. In May 2016, I just emailed the people who were the top contributors and who knew the code base the best and who had the historical experience with it. And we talked about how to add new maintainers who could help review code and respond to pull requests faster. I did this big effort to consolidate the repositories because we had 20 or 30, and we got that number down a lot. And so it just really started the dialogue that we needed to keep the project healthy and growing. And another thing that has helped kind of grow MoveIt is kind of getting enthusiasm and excitement and involvement with MoveIt through this idea of a World MoveIt Day. So just a hackathon like a lot of projects have. I don't think we've seen a lot of them in the ROS community, but certainly other types of open source projects have them. It was an idea of actually Michael Ferguson. He was CTO at Fetch. He's now kind of moved on, but he said, "Hey, Dave, you should organize this," and then he disappeared, and I've been organizing it since. But I appreciate his suggesting that. And so again, it's made excitement. We had our third year this year, and the stats was we had 100 participants at 12 locations around the world. The numbers are different here. We, at that one day, or around that week, so this is measured for, I think, a week's period, we had 85 pull requests merged, 41 pull requests open, 97 issues closed, but then 107 issues open. So, it's unending. You can't ever catch up. There's always a lot of work to be done. But I think these are pretty impressive numbers for a single component of ROS. We have a lot of activity going on. This is a picture actually from, I think, here in Stuttgart, the World MoveIt Day in Germany. And I want to just give acknowledgement to all the other guys who are making MoveIt great. Particularly Robert and Michael are super active. They're both here in Germany, and they are usually the first to respond to pull requests and kind of help solve regressions. And then this whole other team, like Heist is here today, he's been really helpful in orchestrating all of that. So the talks want us to talk about for fun and for profit. So kind of how this company idea, and I don't want to get too full of myself, this is still a small company, we're around 10 people now, but I looked after grad school and thought about some of these big robotic companies that have all this traction and funding and maybe a chance to get on the ground floor with some investment, get some equity. And yeah, I had some decent offers, but I thought that if I went with any of these other companies, I wouldn't be able to work on MoveIt anymore, and it's just something that I'm kind of crazy about. I don't know why. I think it's fun. It's got an exclamation mark. And so I decided that I kind of wanted to just keep consulting around it, and growing that seemed like a good opportunity. So it started at the Amazon Picking Challenge. The first year they did that is when we were Team PickNik, and we didn't win at all. But it was a great learning experience. We were working with a perception group at our university, and so I blame them for not putting enough energy into the perception calibration side, but it was everyone. After the Amazon Picking Challenge, I did an internship at Google Robotics, and I just got really lucky here, but another team inside Google Robotics wanted me to do another internship, and I said no because I've done 4 internships already. And they said, oh, how about you start consulting? And I was still working on my PhD, but because we had some funding delays, I said yes to that. And so that was kind of when I had to form PickNik, the company. So just kind of got really lucky there. It was actually because Swiri's funding got delayed by the government. I'm sure a lot of you have been in that case before where your PhD funding gets held up in bureaucracy. But it worked out well for me because then it allowed me to take a semester off and really focus on developing MoveIt. I got a project around ROS control as well. After that semester, though, I really wanted to finish my PhD and not get distracted, so I stopped. It's been a few more semesters wrapping that up. And then I graduated, and I took some time off and went to circus school, because that's one of my hobbies. So talking about being personal and fun, but I was actually at circus school when I got the next email for a company who needed some help with MoveIt. And so I decided to end my travels early and start working with them. And then some other companies came in, and so I had the crazy idea that I had too much work, and so I would hire a team, and that somehow would be less work. Not true. Hiring a team is more work, but we're completely bootstrapped, which is kind of crazy that we're able to just kind of take our extra earnings and pre-invest into the company. We haven't done any investors or VC. And so these guys were the initial ones that joined me. Andy, the taller guy, I met in grad school and kind of worked with him. He was on the PickNik challenge or started the Amazon Picking Challenge. And then Mike I met while working with another company as a consultant, and he joined on. And then this picture is more recent and a bigger team, but we, again, have about 10 people now on top of that. And so it's been really quite the whirlwind. And now I'm reading books on management as well as trying to improve my coding abilities and learn C++ 17, which blows my mind. And I take a lot of inspiration from WordPress. The company behind WordPress is Automatic. I just kind of want to throw this out there. I think they have a pretty cool company culture. I was a web developer in high school and I guess in college just to kind of fund myself. And I worked with WordPress, which is not a glamorous code base. Avoid it at all costs. But at the time, it was good. PHP, I guess. And Automatic has this distributed team of people around the world who contribute to an open source project, but they also are able to make money by having, in their case, they offer cloud hosting. And we haven't quite found a model exactly like that for PickNik, but I've definitely talked to the founder, Matt Mullenweg, and kind of got tips from him. So just one of the companies that inspired me, I thought I'd throw that out there. We've now worked with over 20 companies, and here's some of the ones that we can kind of show what we've been working with. So it's just been really exciting traction, and again, it's only been just over a year. So now I want to move on to the challenges of like, we're trying to grow MoveIt, but we don't have the cash infusion that maybe a venture capitalist would provide, and if we did have that, they probably wouldn't allow it to be open source. So it's a hard problem, and a lot of the concerns that I'm sure the people at Fraunhofer and Swery and the guys who had ROS-Industrial are all too aware of is you want to share the cost of developing some open source software, but a lot of the companies who want to invest are worried about like other companies, their competitors, like benefiting from this. So you have the freeloader problem, and so you really have to structure in a way that like everyone feels like they're winning, even if the side effect happens. A lot of times people are getting a lot from open source, and so I think it's only fair to kind of contribute some back as well. And so cost sharing is very helpful. Kind of what the focus technical projects, the FTPs here do, is that you're not asking one company to fund it, but you're getting several so that they don't feel like they have to pay for the whole thing, and that kind of reduces the anxiety around that. There's the issue of companies who have investors or just are putting their own money into it. They want to build their intellectual property, and so maybe making everything open source is going to be a challenge, but you can typically make the argument that if we collaborate together and connect with research labs who have the better technology, you can actually kind of benefit more collectively. But again, I don't have all the solutions to this. And then the problem of the maintenance and support, no one wants to pay for. And so you kind of have to squeeze that out of other contracts where you're doing this big feature and you happen to be able to do a little bit on the side of actually responding to current bugs and current pull requests. And so trying to find the right balance between that without going over budget on projects is a continuous challenge. And then things like devoting resources to documentation and kind of helping users who are stuck on things makes it a lot more difficult. So I have this idea, I think I made this up, but I call it the trickle-down theory of open source contributions, and it's, I think, the model that we've kind of been by default taking as the ROS community is that every company who comes in and starts using the ROS ecosystem, there's usually a point where they start forking and fracturing off and developing it more rapidly internally. So they're productizing it, or they kind of are moving too fast for the pace of an open source to be able to absorb those contributions. But what's more important to me is the moment before they do that. So maybe the first 6 months or first year, ideally, they're still getting involved in it, and they're making pull requests back and releasing features that aren't critical to their IP. And that's still good for the project, that you have these engineers coming in and improving the project. And then maybe that company goes off and is now focused on a product. And unfortunately, with ROS-I, typically a lot of companies remove the ROS middleware because of various issues with making it reliable enough, which hopefully will be addressed with ROS-II. And on Friday, hopefully, when the Crystal release is out. But yeah, so we understand that not everything can be open source. We're trying to be very aware of that, not taking a hard line that 100% has to, but if we can, that's great. But we emphasize that we still are going to protect your core IP, and I think this is what most companies who are working in the open source space do. We still argue that many bug fixes and improvements, they're not part of the customer's IP, and so they'd be better if they're open sourced. And this is the classic argument of reducing your maintenance and overhead there. And so for all of the contracts we do at PickNik, we push strongly for this legal language that allows us to make pull requests to the open source project for anything that's like not critical. And so that language, I actually provided an example here. This is more of an American contract, but it says that any ROS packages that originate outside the company's private code repository. So usually there's like MoveIt, the open source project, and then we make an application package specific to their robot and to their needs. That stuff stays closed source, but we ask the permission, and most people have signed on to this, where we can just, without having to go through, be approved for everything, just make pull requests to improve and add features and fix bugs in the MoveIt code base or ROS or Gazebo, whatever project we're working with on that. And then we have this sentence talking about the benefits. I think I got some of this language actually from ROS-Industrial about how the open source release will benefit the company by reducing feature maintenance overhead, leveraging broader community to maintain, test, and debug the software without additional cost to the company. And then we we provide sponsorship attribution. I think that's a big selling point to the companies we work with is we'll make blog posts, we'll post on Discourse your contributions as a thank you, add your logo to the page, typical stuff for an open source project. And then everything else that we do for you will be closed source, confidential, owned by you. We're not going to we're finding that right balance there. And so it's still sometimes a gray area, but we just have discussions with the client. So more challenges of just general maintenance and growing of a project like MoveIt is we have to ensure the quality. And so we get contributions from maybe a graduate student, and they have the best intentions. They're adding all these cool things, but maybe it doesn't take into account certain use cases for certain type of robots, or they haven't tested it across all the different scenarios. It's a very difficult problem, and so we're always trying to get more reviewers to spend more time investing into that. And so part of my job, I think, is to find new people who are qualified to help review code and ensure the quality is upheld. One thing that can get frustrating in a project like MoveIt is the new contributors who come in, and there's continuously new contributors, but they typically aren't aware of the nuances of the ROS-style guideline, which is based on the Google-style guideline, and then we have our own slight tweaks that will we don't tweak the ROS-style line, but we add extra things on top of it for the MoveIt project, and we have our best practices of how the flavor of code in MoveIt looks like, and so each time we get a contribution, we're kind of training them on that, and we hope that they'll stick around make more pull requests and more contributions, and we'll get the benefit from that, but sometimes they don't, and that's okay, but it's just a never-ending struggle to keep that up. And adding little features here and there and little fixes, you can kind of tack on things all day, but eventually you'll need to make larger architectural design decisions, refactoring, to push the next level of capability. And that's something we haven't been able to do well yet in the MoveIt project, is it takes a lot of orchestration and maybe some review as a group to come upon that. And so I'm trying to bring that discussion more into our maintainer meetings. And I think one thing that we need to do is kind of, before having the meeting, have a design doc proposed that we can look at ahead of time and review and discuss, and then kind of finalize decisions and really dig into the tough parts of that proposal in the meeting itself, because we only have about an hour a month. And then something I've been thinking a lot about lately is for a project like MoveIt is how do we ensure stable APIs while enabling developers to make radical improvements and changes. And the current ROS distribution model of ROS Indigo and Kinetic and Melodic, the way we've been doing it makes it very difficult to make those changes, because we usually don't fork for a new version of ROS until the version of ROS is out. And then it's not clear when the time period is that we can make breaking changes and when we need to start making that stable again. So the LTS version, so for example, right now in the ROS project, we have Melodic, and we're making kind of breaking changes, but it's been out for over half a year at this point. When do we consider it stable and then move on to the next version? That's an ongoing discussion. And so one proposal, Michael Gorner has been suggesting, and I'm a proponent of as well, is kind of switching more to a master branch model, and then the master we can always be breaking, and then when we fork for a ROS distro that's now stable, we need to be better at using version numbers, major version numbers. These are all typical things that have been solved in software engineering over and again, but maybe us roboticists aren't as privy to them or used to using them. And so, yeah, we're trying to define a more documented process, and it would be nice if we had this process already well defined, maybe from Open Robotics, or if ROS-Industrial wanted to get involved as well, because it seems like once a project gets adopted by a larger community, let's go somewhere else and talk about maybe the UR Modern driver or something. There's never a point where it's easy to then make a large change and to call it version 2. Like it's just a hard process in the current model of ROS releases. And so I'd love to talk to you afterwards if you have thoughts on this. Other challenges is the time for code reviews and responding fast enough. I think this point's been brought up at other ROS conferences, but it makes a big difference if you respond to a pull request in 1 day versus 2 months. The person who made the pull request will likely have moved way on beyond that in 2 months. and won't really care to take your feedback and fix it. And they've also made a bunch of other improvements that will never make it back into your project. And so I think it's pretty critical that we respond quick enough. And then also, no matter how quality control you have of reviewing code, there's still going to be regressions. So you need resources of someone who's going to fix those. Robert Heiss has done a great job in the MoveIt project of being the guy who jumps in and fixes regressions quickly. But this is a common problem with a lot of maybe ROS-Industrial projects. And yesterday we saw the Turtlebot demo. He said no one responded to his pull request yet. Same thing for MoveIt. This 40 it kind of hovers around there. Well, sometimes we'll get down to 30, but there's pull requests that have been there for months. And then some of them we merge a lot of them within a few days or a few weeks, but then it's a never-ending buildup of pull requests, and you see we have a lot of issues. So how do we address this? It's kind of a time and resources problem. But it's exciting to see that many people are willing to contribute. So we've definitely, I think, in the MoveIt project, gotten the excitement up and convinced enough people that you should be contributing to this. And now it's on us, the maintainer team, to respond fast enough to them. One thing I'm pushing for, but I haven't quite convinced everyone in the MoveIt project, is that maybe we need to add more people with commit access, just kind of trust people more to help review these, because we're just kind of overloaded. So let me know if you're interested and an expert of MoveIt, want to get involved there. One thing that I've been experimenting with, and this is kind of a completely new idea, but in management they say that if you can't measure it, you can't fix it. And I hadn't really realized this, I guess. So I've been trying to measure the response time and the reviewers of MoveIt code. And if we can measure it on the past 7 days, the past 3 months, this is how we've done, we can actually set goals and try to motivate everyone to kind of compete with this. And I'm the top reviewer here, but in all fairness, a lot of my reviews are around the website and the tutorials, easy stuff. By far, some of these other reviewers are doing the harder stuff, so I want to not toot my own horn too much here and admit that, Robert, for example, is doing a much harder pull request reviews than I am. But this is something that it automatically connects to your GitHub organization and populates statistics. So these stats are across, I think, 10 different repositories: the website, the tutorials, the MoveIt code base, the messages. And then we have some other repositories that are more experimental. And it collectively gets these stats. And internally, actually, at PickNik, this connects to a Slack channel and pings you to respond to pull requests. But this actually also allows us to set company goals internally at PickNik that we ask everyone to review X number of pull requests per week, and we can actually measure that at the end of the quarter to see how we've done against our goals. It's not a hard requirement, but I think it's good to have those challenges for people. And I want to talk about some case studies of how we've been engaging the open source community or engaging commercial companies to do open source. This vicarious engagement was pretty cool because they actually agreed to 100% open source, and it wasn't too technically hard, but they wanted better support of Baxter in the latest version of Gazebo, on the latest version of ROS, and so it ended up making 23 pull requests across 5 repositories. We made a lot of progress on improving Gazebo ROS packages, for example. I found 35 seconds of improvement in how fast it loads up. There were just ridiculous sleep timers in there. So that was just kind of an example of this company they needed Baxter to work better for them, but they didn't care if it was closed source. They were willing to open source it, and so great on them. Our Franca Imica partnership's been really exciting because it was a win-win where they are now the official robot of our tutorials, and so obviously they get marketing, and I think they've made some sales from that. They've definitely benefited, and they funded us to totally revamp our tutorials, create a new website, and kind of get rid of the old PR2 robot that no longer is maintained. You can't buy them anymore. Some people would argue that it's maintained a little bit, but I would say barely. And so now we have a lower cost arm that you can use if you want to learn MoveIt. Still not low cost enough for, I know, a lot of users in the world, but much cheaper than a PR2. And another case study is we're trying to really ramp up for MoveIt 2.0, and a lot of people ask me about this. And this project was not MoveIt 2.0, but it did get our developer team working on ROS 2.0. And so now we have a lot of in-house skill on how to use ROS 2.0 that we're hoping to use in the next year on finally jumping to MoveIt 2.0. But yeah, Amazon has been working on the technical steering committee of ROS, and they needed some help porting some of the pieces of it, and so we've gotten involved there. And I guess I don't know quite what to say about how we are profitable. We kind of just make standard time and material contracts, and we give discounts if you do open source, and if you don't, then we charge a little bit more. That's basically it. But our mission is to provide a globally recognized open source manipulation platform, so that's MoveIt, that enables organizations of all sizes. So we don't want to focus just on education for high schoolers, or we want to focus on the big corporations and the small startups. A lot of startups we work with actually are using MoveIt to do their investor demos to get funding, which is interesting to watch. But yeah, to leverage robotics for applications. That's kind of what our mission is. I know it's a lot of just standard mission speak. And our strategies is we collaborate with companies needing robotic expertise. We want to expand the open source community through grants, consulting support, and commercial products, or commercial contracts. And then in the future, we haven't really started this yet, but we're definitely ideating, is that we would eventually like to have some products built on top of MoveIt, where we do have a few things that are more a licensed software, but because it's built on top of MoveIt, we would still continuously be improving MoveIt itself and be trickling down contributions. We haven't gotten to that part yet, but perhaps there'll be some enterprise premium stuff in the future. And so, to me, this is the key part is our marketing approach is simply, rather than spending money on advertising and fancy things, we just do open source contributions. And I think we're well known for that, and I get to be up here giving talks, I guess. And so far it seems to work. And so on our website, on the bottom of every page, it says that we dedicate a significant portion of resources into improving MoveIt, and we put a ton of volunteer hours, essentially, into the community building and the organization, the leadership, and also code reviewing. And we're making pull requests from different client projects. So that's kind of our strategy. Our tagline is Accelerate Robotics Development. And so we do a lot of other companies do this too, but we're serving our clients by helping them strategically utilize cutting-edge open source software. So kind of they want to use this, but they're not quite sure where the risks are, what areas work well, what areas don't. We can kind of provide consulting expertise around that. And so we de-risk that open source software. And again, there's other companies doing this. ROS-Industrial is doing a great job of doing this. And then we're a for-profit company. We're not a nonprofit. So how does MoveIt benefit? I think I've already outlined this enough. But we're helping increase user adoption by allowing a lot of companies to use MoveIt and feel better about using it because we can support them if something goes wrong. And the more users you have, the more people are fixing the code base issues and documentation, providing leadership. I think this is a key one is we've aligned our success financially with the success of MoveIt. So now we're actually financially motivated to keep MoveIt alive and growing it so that we're successful and so that we have our job. And so I think that's a win for both the company and the project. And I mentioned the code review requirements. So we've worked across a lot of different industries at this point. Mirko asked that I talk more about applications a little bit, so I threw this up there. A big thing we've been working on is human surgery, which is crazy amount of testing and integration tests and quality control. We worked on some space applications, brazing, machine tending, bin picking, which is all the rage right now. Everyone's working on bin picking, it seems like. We've done a little bit with food service, therapeutics for humans, cleaning services, smart sensors. We've been all over the place, so whatever you got, throw it at us. And then my final thoughts is we made changes in a few years, but for now we're not doing venture capital route. And so we don't have a pitch deck. I guess what you just have seen today is our pitch deck. So we're not currently building intellectual property. We're just open sourcing anything that we can, and the rest belongs to our customers. And the benefit of this is we don't have a fiduciary responsibility to any investors to maximize profit. And we do want to be profitable, but we can also optimize for open source impact. And so kind of circling this back to maybe what Willow Garage did is they had a lot of impact, and I can't compare to what we're doing at all to what Willow Garage was able to do, but they had a lot more money. But we're trying to have an impact, and so we can kind of have a balance of those two. And so a quick ask, we're still seeking funding for all sorts of MoveIt projects. If you want to do any code sprints or focused technical projects, talk to me. In particular, though, ROS 2.0 is something that I think will be important for the ROS 2 community to have everyone switch, is that I think a lot of people will be waiting for MoveIt to make the jump before they make the jump. And so that's kind of my big argument. I've been talking to a lot of big companies about funding this, and we have some good opportunities coming up. I was hoping to announce something today, but I can't. But maybe something's on the horizon. So we'd like to collaborate with you on those. And I'd also just, in general, love to hear feedback about how you've used MoveIt and where it's disappointed you, or where you want to see something changed, or where it's been awesome. Come talk to me. Overall, open source is really rewarding. It's been very motivating to myself and to the guys I work with to see everything used on such a global scale. The big vision is important to have, and every company has a vision. I think just open source robotics is a really exciting one for me. So I've been lucky to turn my hobby into a profitable company, and I think the struggle of open source is worth it. So let's keep alive what Willow Garage started, that creating a truly robust general-purpose robot software is hard. It's so hard that none of us can hope to do it on our own. And with that, thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Questions? So So I do have one. As you say, we are not building intellectual property, and though I appreciate and actually I applaud you for being brave to turn away probably interesting job offers and start your own thing, doing what you believe in, isn't this in the long run a bit risky?
Is it
a bit risky? Like, you're not building any intellectual property. So the company is running only for MoveIt skills that gets mostly open sourced.
Yeah, most companies that are new are risky. So I actually think of this as less risky, and I could totally be wrong. You can debate this with me, but I think if we went like the venture capital route and took a bunch of investment, your chance or probability of success is much lower. Like, you have like a 10% chance of making it big and rich and unicorn, and then the rest just kind of fall apart. And so what we have so far is more of a small business, which is maybe a little more stable, but who knows? You're right, maybe next month we don't exist.
Or maybe those packages on top of the third part, the one still to come. So
yeah, so I'm trying to be all my cards are out. I didn't really hide anything in this talk. I just kind of showed you all our strategies, but that is a thing we're exploring in the future.
I was another contributor to MoveIt. Did a bit of some ROS packages. How can people in the audience contribute to MoveIt without being a contributor? How can they contribute to MoveIt without having, for example, commit asses or that kind of stuff? How can you contribute otherwise?
Yeah, so anyone actually can help review. And so before we kind of grant commit access, we like to see people who are really interested. You can still click the approve button or +1 or leave feedback like, hey, you forgot to check your divide by 0. You can still get involved in reviewing code. You just can't click the merge button yet. And like I said, I'd like to loosen that up a little bit. But anyone can submit pull requests, improve documentation, join us for our meetings and discuss what you want to see done. Or yeah, it's pretty open.
All right, so if there are no further questions, let's thank our speaker again.
Thank you.